Hey everyone, David C. Anderson here coming at you from the Knife Center, and welcome to our next episode of Beat the Icon, where we take a classic knife and see what else there is out there that can hold a candle to it. And today we're taking a look at a classic, the buck knife, the Buck 110. So the Buck 110 was originally released in 1964, and the influence of this knife is almost impossible to overstate. It really was a game-changing and a archetype-setting knife for the knife industry. The influence of it is everywhere. What we have here is a knife that, at the time, Buck essentially described as a folding knife that could do the work of a fixed blade, and that's due to the lockback mechanism here. Now, obviously, a strongly made fixed blade will still be stronger than a folding knife, but you kind of get what they were going with that kind of description. Knives with this amount of blade, with that kind of a strong lock and a hand-filling grip, were not nearly as common back then as they are today. This really is a knife that is a very hard worker. Nowadays, this knife will set you back about $60. You've got a 3 3/4 inch blade, 420 HC steel, which is not anything like the modern super steels you can get right now, but Buck is really well known for getting absolutely the most performance out of this steel. Works really well, especially at the given price point. Handles, you've got brass bolsters and ebony wood inlays on each side, and a fairly thick grip overall. Again, this is not a slim pocket-friendly knife. It'll fill the hand, and in fact, it wasn't even designed to be carried in the pocket. They supply a belt pouch to carry this knife with. But this knife was so influential, it created the Buck knife template. Even though there are plenty other Buck knives, when you say Buck knife, this is what you envision, because the influence was staggering, and pretty much everyone was making their version of this knife not too long after this knife was introduced. And that influence carries through to obviously some folks who made some direct clones, but even folks who made their own standalone models that were really quite successful, like this case Hammerhead right here. Obviously not a direct clone, but very heavily influenced by the 110. And that influence comes through today in ways you might not even realize. I mean, it's so influential that its influence sometimes becomes virtually invisible. Take this knife right here, for example, the CIVIVI Rustic Gent. If I just held this knife up in isolation, you probably wouldn't think Buck 110, or at least I typically don't, even though I'm around them all day. Check out the definite influence between that knife, 1964 to, when was this introduced, like 2020, I want to say, somewhere around there. Last couple of years in any case. But we're not here to talk about the Rustic Gent. I wouldn't really consider that quite an alternative or a combatant against the Buck 110. So let's take a look at some things that are, maybe some things that are a little bit more modern. And the first example is actually something within Buck's own lineup, and that would be something like the Buck 110 Slim Pro TRX. And what these knives really represent is Buck keeping the 110 current, which they've done for a number of years, but this is just kind of the latest iteration of that. This knife was introduced in 2022, and kind of funnily enough, the price on this is about $110. Buck 110 for $110. It's kind of fun to think about in a way. And it's kind of it's Buck's take on if the 110 were designed today. It's kind of updated to be a little more conducive to the way a lot of folks carry their knives nowadays, and also as sort of a response to a lot of the things that came after the Buck 110, which we're going to get to in a little bit. First thing, you'll see the blade is slightly adjusted with a straight clip point here, and we've got S30V blade steel here for significantly upgraded edge retention right there. You've got dual thumb studs, which enables this knife to be opened with one hand, using the thumb on the studs, as you might have guessed. As I've turned the knife over, you can also see we have a pocket clip on this knife. This is a much more pocketable knife due to its slim construction. G10 on the handle scales right here. Torx adjustability on all the points along the construction as opposed to a pinned construction. Really, it's got kind of all the modern amenities right there. Works really well, carries really nicely, and that could absolutely be an alternative to the 110 because it still is a 110. There's more affordable versions of the Buck Slim 110. You can get some for like less than 30 bucks nowadays for some injection molded handle versions out there. So there's still very affordable options too. Another possible alternative to the 110 is the 112, which you have right here. You can get it in a classic configuration, spec'd out the same way as the classic Buck 110, but you can get both of those knives as well in this new sport version right here, which also sees some significant upgrades. About 130 bucks for this 112. You've got a 3-inch blade, S30V blade steel, but you've got the thumb studs, you've got the pocket clip, and you've got a thicker handle here as opposed to these slim handles. But because you've got aluminum instead of brass and micarta instead of wood, the whole package is definitely lighter. So even though it's a thick and still hand-filling knife, fills the hand really nicely for a smaller knife, it's not a boat anchor in your pocket. Really nice option right here, whether you go with the 112 or the 110 version of this. So as I said, these knives are a little bit of a, or you could interpret them anyway, as a response to the stuff that came after. And we'll talk about a few of those now. And the first is the Gerber Gator, which at the time these were introduced were absolutely considered to be something like a Buck 110 killer. Nowadays, they're more affordable than the 110. Made in America though, just like all the knives we've looked at so far, just about 40 bucks for this knife. You've got blade length just about the same, 3 3/4 of an inch. You've got the same steel, 420 HC, but the handles, you've got the Gator grip, essentially. It is a rubberized material that goes synonymously with the Gator series from Gerber. These knives were introduced in 1991, and at that year's Blade Show, they were voted the most innovative knife of the year. One key distinction you'll see here on the Gator is they've moved the lock bar release for that lockback to about midway down the handle. And although it was not designed specifically for this, one of the things that does is it makes it a little easier to close one-handed than a back-mounted backlock. All right, next up we've got to talk about the Spyderco Endura. And while it may not look like it as much today, when the originals were released, they were also kind of thought of as squarely aimed at the 110. And that makes even more sense when you consider it with its sister knife, the Delica. The Endura and the Delica are essentially the exact same size as the 110 and the 112 Ranger. Here we've got the 110 with the Endura, and we can also compare the 112 Ranger with the Delica. Virtually the same across both of these knives. And they really also go to show, even though the folding hunter aspect was a little bit reduced in these particular Spyderco knives, the influence that the 110 and its sister 112 had on the industry is still reverberating through when these knives were released. But essentially this is, again, the lockback format continuing to be evolved. You've got a 3 3/4 inch blade again, VG10 stainless steel with a full flat grind on the current 4th generation of the Endura, although originally, I believe it did come with a hollow ground partial height grind, which you see on the Buck 110. You would see that originally on the Endura, and it helps that comparison even more so than the fully modern versions right now. Like the Gator, we have that mid-mounted lockback with another innovation here that was borrowed from David Boy, a famous knife maker that Spyderco licensed this kind of feature from, and that is the Boy Dent, which is that little concave scoop right there, and it does a couple of things. One, first and foremost, and according to Boy himself, when you really grip that knife, you're less likely to kind of squeeze that lock bar release when you're really pushing the knife hard. So it's a little bit of extra safety right there. The other thing it does is it can help you locate that lock bar a little bit quicker without having to really think about it, because your finger is immediately going to feel that piece. So you're not even going to have to look at the knife to know when you're going to be able to close it safely. Now the handles on this particular version aren't as nice as the classic 110, or not as fancy feeling, shall we say. These are simple FRN versions, but I did pick the brown at least, so it kind of thematically goes with the 110. Several different colors can be had. Many, many upgraded versions of this knife are out there with different handle materials. Unfortunately, we didn't have any of our exclusive Packawood versions in stock at the moment. We do have the Delica though. Otherwise, that would have definitely been the one to show up in this video. Other things you see that you don't get on the classic 110 is that one-hand opening thanks to the Spyderco round hole in the blade right there. You've also got a 4-position pocket clip on this knife now. Works in tip up or tip down orientation on either side of the knife. And when you combine that with the qualities of the lock and that particular opening method, great for left-handers or right-handers, great for any preference out there, which is something the classic 110 has always done really well also. Now, of course, as I mentioned, these knives do kind of lean away from the folding hunter aspect of the Buck 110 folding hunter. So if you want that in a Spyderco format, definitely have to mention the Stretch. And in my mind, this is definitely the more appropriate 110 competitor today in Spyderco's lineup, but for historical reasons, I absolutely had to talk about the Endura and the Delica first. But with this particular knife, you've got essentially the same stuff I just talked about on that Endura. Comes in about 106 right now. You've got similar specs, same steel in this case, VG10, but you have, in this case, a drop point blade. And yes, the classic 110 is clearly a clip point, but this is the folding hunter in Spyderco's lineup right now, and absolutely that is why I make the comparison here. And it also has a slightly meatier handle than the Endura does. So if you want a bit of that classic 110 girth in the hand, strong feeling when you push the knife hard, this is absolutely a place to look. You also get one other feature you don't get on the 110 or these other Spydercos, and that is that finger choil spanning the ricasso of the blade and the leading part of the handle itself. Lets you choke up a little bit better. You can do that on the 110, but you're dealing with the hump of the bolster there, so it's not quite as comfortable, even if it can still be done. All right, let's look at some newer affordable options now. Let's say the classic 110, the American-made versions, are out of your price range right now. Although again, the Slim Pro Select versions, very affordable. But there are other things out there too, such as the K-Bar folding hunter. Even cribs the name from the classic 110. 23 bucks or so right now for this particular knife. Same kind of size, actually slightly longer on the blade, in fact. In fact, when I hold them up right there, you can kind of see how it compares. Tiny, tiny bit longer overall, but a little bit more slender as well. Blade on this particular knife is a 420 stainless steel. So again, nice basic stuff in this case. Same kind of clip point styling with the hollow grind, a little bit of a swedge as well, just like the classic. For the handles, we've got a classically positioned lockback. We've got stainless steel construction with bolsters and G10 handle scales. Still has a bit of that reassuring heft in the hand of the classic 110 archetype, while being a little bit slimmer at the same time. And then you do get some of those modern conveniences, such as a pocket clip, tip down orientation for this particular clip, but you can carry it on either side. And you've also got dual thumb studs, so another great ambidextrous option. All right, next on our affordable alternatives is cold steel. And the 110, I think, across cold steel's lineup has had a pretty big influence, not just one particular knife. So we're gonna talk about a few right here. The first is the Double Safe Hunter. Comes in about $34 right now. This knife is very, very nearly as big as the 110. We were talking negligible difference, and you do have a broader blade, however, on this particular knife. But the weight is much less because we're dealing with injection molded handles here. As for strength, we're going with the mid-mounted lockback here. And in Cold Steel's way of kind of improving old technologies, you've got a secondary safety here on the front. That's why they call it the Double Safe Hunter. And that's gonna prevent that lock bar from being pressed down. So rather than resorting to something like the Boy Dent, they're just gonna lock it out so you can't use it at all. Then when you want to close it, of course you don't have to use the extra safety at all, but it's there if you need it. You can also lock it in that closed position, which is pretty nice. We do have a nice broad pocket clip here to keep it stationary in your pocket. And you've got a reversible thumb stud in this case. You can certainly use the back portion of that thumb stud fairly well, but if you want, you can switch it around so you have a little bit of a bigger stud on the left-hand side, or you can just actuate it quite easily either way. 8CR series stainless, slightly less on the blade length. No finger choil here like those Spydercos, but you do have a little spot you can choke up a little bit. Has a very versatile feel in the hand, and it's only about 34 bucks. Very nice. And the other main difference you're gonna see here, apart from the broader shape, we've got a flat saber grind as opposed to the hollow saber on the Buck 110. Stepping up a little bit price-wise at about $45, we have the Range Boss. Another very clearly 110 inspired knife design. Now the blade on the Range Boss is actually a little bit longer. We're at almost a full 4 inches on this one. Full flat grind, 4034 stainless, and I believe, yeah, this is the first stone-washed finish we've looked at on the table, which is a really nice, rugged working finish because your scratches are gonna blend into the blade a little bit. You also have a slimmer carrying handle, injection molded again. Out of the box, it's set up with a right side pocket clip, but it should have another one as well for lefties. You've also got the same reversible thumb stud we just looked at on the Double Safe Hunter, and you've got another kind of improvement on the lockback with Cold Steel's Triad Lock, which was designed by Andrew Demko. You can see when you compare it from the spine shot, Classic 110, there's no real gap between the leaf spring at the back and the blade, but on the Cold Steel, there's a little bit of a gap right there, and that's because they put a stop pin right along that part right there. They've changed a few of the angles underneath as well, so that the lockup here is a little bit stronger and much longer lasting as well. It's kind of self-adjusting over time as things wear down. And because of that, you've got even more longevity on a knife like this, which is really great to see on inexpensive stuff that's, you know, again, this is just a $45 knife right here. Doesn't have the same kind of reassuring heft that you would get from the Classic 110, but it's definitely going to be easier to carry every day. So as I mentioned, blade there is a little bit longer. Let's get into a couple kind of beefier options, maybe slightly tactical alternatives to the 110, and we'll stick with Cold Steel. And I gotta talk about the Recon 1 clip point blade. It comes in about 124 bucks right now, and in a way, even less so than the standard 110, you can kind of think of this as an alternative to the finger grooved 110, which some people have called kind of the tactical 110, especially if you were to add something like a quick bar or quick stud to this to make it one-hand opening. We do sell those as well. Or you could go with something like this Cold Steel right here. We've got a 4-inch blade length S35 VN steel, kind of a bigger, meaner interpretation of the classic 110 shape, high flat grind, black DLC coating, I believe, for keeping the reflections down a little bit, and looking a little menacing as well. G10 handles, you've got a couple of those finger grooves, much more aggressive finger guard going on. 2 pocket clips, one for each side, and again, that triad lock for rigidity. Can't say enough good things about this knife. It's got the ergos you want on a hard use knife and the durability to back it up. But maybe you don't have 125 or so bucks to spend. Maybe you've got about 27 bucks. Go back to K-Bar with another larger, beefier take on the 110 format with their MULE heavy duty folder 2. 4-inch blade again, steel here is 420 series. You've got stainless steel bolsters, G10 inlays or G10 grips, lockback with that boy style dent right there, reversible pocket clip, really meaty feel in the hand. And in fact, the blade itself is not too much bigger than the 110, but the handle itself definitely gets an upgrade in terms of the amount you've got to grab onto when you are pushing this knife hard. And coming in at this price, $27, it's definitely one of the most kind of hard use feeling knives there is on the market. All right, last but not least, let's go more premium. Let's go a little more fancy, shall we say. And would love to talk about the Boker Optima right now. These are more expensive. They come in about 210 bucks for this version right here. They're made in Solingen, Germany. Let's hold it up there next to the Classic 110. Pretty much the same dimensions right there. You could say maybe a tiny bit smaller, but one thing that Boker have always done with this series is created a more premium feeling knife. It feels a little better put together overall. The fit and finish is a little bit fancier. They also made it more comfortable. This version has green micarta handle scales, and check out the swell going on that handle. You don't really see that too much on the just a head-on photograph on the website. You really have to see it there turned over in hand. It's not just the inlays themselves that are molded over and rounded over. It carries fully through onto the bolsters right there and creates one of the more comfortable folding knife handles on the market at any price. Really feels quite good. Now the steel here is actually a bit of a throwback to the original 110 in this case, 440C stainless, which is what in 1964 the original Buck 110 was equipped with. If you want something a little more fancy feeling than micarta, there are other handle options, including some natural materials, and there's even some exchangeable blade versions of this out there as well, which is pretty cool. Next up is a knife that's a little bit smaller and a little bit more stylized, but you can still see that 110 heritage, and I'm talking about the Viper Turn. About $230 for this knife, about a 3.25 inch blade. I'll hold it up compared to the 110 right there. You can see where someone might have had this in their mind and just kind of went a little crazy with the pencils on the sketch pad and came up with something awesome. The blade steel there is M390, so a ton of performance, high flat grind with that swedge, very nice. Titanium bolster in this particular case. Wood inlays here. This is a walnut wood scale. No pocket clip on this version, but there are different scaled versions of this knife out there. Some of them do have pocket clips. This one comes with a simple pouch style sheath for your belt with no flap, no snap flap like the Classic 110 comes with. But really nice, awesome Italian design details such as the crown spine. We see that a lot from Italian knife makers. Mid-mounted lockback with some jimping on there to make access a little bit easier. And ball bearings in addition to a lockback mechanism. Not something you see too often, if at all, really. What that does allow you to do with the dual thumb studs there is kind of flick the blade open a little bit more like other modern locking style or other modern locking mechanismed knives can be done, whereas most lockbacks have a little bit of a harder time doing. And last but not least, we have the Benchmade Crooked River series. The only knife here without a lockback mechanism. Although if you want to be pedantic, the Triad lock from Cold Steel is technically not a lockback, which is technically correct. So there we go. But this is a really cool series of knives right here that is several steps away in sort of knife technology evolution from the Classic 110, but you can still see the influence. You can still see the DNA of the 110. Now this one right here, this is the Mini Crooked River, which is really more of a medium-sized knife. They do have a larger size, but the medium here, or the small, I should say, even though it's a smaller knife than the 110 as well, when we're talking actual sharpened edge, they're not too far away from each other. Just a little bit less on the Benchmade, but you've also got S30V steel here for more edge retention. The inlays here are aluminum rather than brass or any other particular material, and we've got diamond wood scales here, which is a stabilized wood material. You've also got the axis lock. Lets you do cool flicky things like that you're just not going to be able to do with any kind of lockback style knife out there. Works great as well, maintains the ambidextrous quality that classic lockbacks also enjoy. We've got the pocket clip, which is reversible for either side. You've got the dual thumb studs. It's really a very finely made knife that's going to work for just about everyone and really continues to take that classic Buck 110 formula into the future. All right, that's all I've got to show you for right now, but let me know your thoughts. I'm really eager to hear this. What on this table do you think really takes the fight to the 110? And I'll accept either answer, whether you're talking about the classic 110 or the 110 Slim Pro TRX, all the letters. What are the knives out there that make the best alternatives to these, or do you stick with the classic? Let me know And in the meantime, if you want to get your hands on any of these knives, links are in the description as always. They'll take you over to KnifeCenter.com, and while you're there, make sure you sign up for our Knife Rewards program so you can earn some free money back to spend on your next purchase. I'm David C. Anderson from the Knife Center, signing off. See you next time.